"That's what you get for being selfish," my daughter-in-law hissed. My cheek burned, but my son's silence cut deeper than any slap. In front of 130 people, they tried to end me, but they forgot one thing. You can't erase the hand that fed you. This wasn't my ending, it was theirs. The crack of my glasses on marble was the only sound. Lucas only stared at the polished shoes I bought him last Christmas. Beside him, Veronica adjusted her perfect white dress, smirking in triumph. A son's silence is a loud confession. Have you ever felt the world collapse into one single betrayal? I knelt, calm, gathering the sharp pieces. In the shard of glass, a stranger stared back at me, a woman they had just created. The stranger they created didn't go home. There was no home left to go to. She went to the only place that made sense, my gallery. The air inside was cool, thick with the familiar scent of oil paint and turpentine, a scent that had always meant peace. Tonight, it smelled only of silence. In my hand, I still held the two halves of my broken glasses, the metal frame cold against my skin. My reflection was fractured, split in two, a fitting portrait for what I had become. My eyes drifted across the cavernous moonlit room, past canvases of swirling colors and stark, bold lines. They settled on a small, simple frame tucked away in a place of honor, next to a formidable abstract by a promising young artist. It wasn't for sale. It was my most prized possession. A child's drawing done in crayon 25 years ago, a messy, brilliant yellow sun with 100 crooked rays beaming out from a blue sky background. I remembered the moment he gave it to me. Lucas, all of 6 years old with a smudge of yellow on his nose, his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. "Look, Mommy," he'd whispered, his voice full of breathless pride. "It's a forever sun. So you're never in the dark." I smiled, a real smile, for a moment. Kindness has a long memory. That forever sun hung on my wall for 2 decades. It survived a move, a renovation, and the passing of my husband. It survived everything, until Veronica saw it. I remember her first visit to the gallery, clinging to my son's arm. She scanned the walls with a practiced, dismissive air, her eyes gliding over pieces worth more than the car she drove. Then she stopped at the drawing. She tilted her head. A small, delicate laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, Lucas, is this one of your little art projects from kindergarten? It's charming. But for a professional gallery, maybe we should find something a little more adult for this prime spot, don't you think? Do you know that feeling? When the person you love starts speaking with someone else's voice?" Lucas didn't defend his forever son. He just squeezed her hand. He smiled. He agreed. That was the first crack. The first sign that my son, the boy who gave me the sun, was starting to drift into the shadows. It started like that. Small things, little poison darts disguised as loving suggestions. One week, it was Veronica helpfully replacing the old chip teapot my husband and I had used every morning with a sterile silver thing that had no soul. I found my teapot in the donation box. Lucas said I was being sentimental. Contempt is a slow-growing weed. Another time, she'd go through my closet, pulling out my comfortable cardigans and simple dresses. "Evelyn, you have to present an image," she'd sigh, as if my very existence was a branding problem she needed to solve. I watched her. I listened. I stayed quiet. I thought my silence was a form of peace, a way to keep my son close. I now understand that my silence wasn't peace. It was permission. Permission for the disrespect to grow, to fester, to become bold enough to raise a hand to my face in a room full of people. I finally set the broken glasses down on my husband's old oak desk. The wood was solid, warm, worn smooth by years of his presence. My hand rested on another object he'd left me, a large leather-bound ledger. The gold-embossed title had long since faded, but I knew what it said, E. Whitaker Holdings. Robert had been meticulous. He wasn't just an art lover, he was a brilliant, quiet investor, and he had taught me everything. He taught me to log every investment, every acquisition, every major expense. Veronica saw an old woman who ran a dusty little art gallery, a harmless widow living off the fumes of the past. She saw a worn-out apron and clothes from a discount store. She saw what I wanted her to see. She never once bothered to look inside the books. My fingers traced the elegant cursive of my husband's handwriting on the first page, then flipped to the very last entry, written just last week in my own steady hand. An invoice number, a date, and a description. Wedding venue and catering, paid in full. It was a habit he had taught me to keep the records perfect. A habit I still maintained. A habit they were about to deeply, deeply regret. The phone call came 3 days before the wedding. Lucas. His voice on the line was smooth, measured, and full of a concern that didn't quite reach my ears. It sounded rehearsed. "Mom, can you come over? Veronica and we need to talk to you. We're worried." Worry. It was a word they had started using a lot lately, a word that felt less like care and more like a warning. I drove to their apartment, a sleek, minimalist box in the sky that I knew from my ledger cost them $7,000 a month in rent. The door opened not just to my son and his fiancée, but to her parents as well. The Gables. An ambush. I should have known. Mr. Gable, a large man with a handshake like a closing vault, ushered me in. His wife, a woman wrapped in beige cashmere and a thin, painted-on smile, offered me tea I didn't want. They sat me down on a white leather sofa that was as cold and unforgiving as the atmosphere in the room. They called it a family meeting. It began with a performance of kindness. Mrs. Gable spoke first, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Evelyn, dear, we're all so concerned. That big gallery, that cavernous apartment. It's so much for one person to handle. You must be terribly lonely." Veronica nodded, placing a possessive hand on my son's knee. "We just want you to be safe, Mom. Happy, taken care of." I watched them. I listened. I stayed silent. Then Mr. Gable leaned forward. He placed his thick hands on the glass coffee table. With a slow, deliberate motion, he slid a stack of glossy brochures across the surface. The sound was obscene in the quiet room. The brochures fanned out before me, filled with smiling, silver-haired strangers. Sunset Meadows, Golden Years Villa, Tranquil Harbor Assisted Living. The trigger, the reason for the meeting, the final brutal act of their play. "We've done some research," Mr. Gable announced, his voice booming with the pride of a man who believes he's won. "These places have round-the-clock medical staff, planned social activities, everything you could possibly need. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who are planning your funeral while you're still breathing?" I didn't look at the brochures. I looked at my son. He was studying a loose thread on the arm of his chair. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He hadn't looked at me once since I'd arrived. "My home has everything I need," I said, my voice even. Calm. Veronica sighed, a long theatrical sound of exasperation. "Evelyn, you're not listening. This isn't about what you think you need. It's about what's responsible. What if you fall? No one would know for days. Love can die in a quiet room." "And my gallery?" I asked, my gaze still fixed on my son. "My life's work? My husband's legacy?" It was then that Mr. Gable made his fatal mistake. He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Well," he said, waving a hand through the air as if clearing away a minor inconvenience, "a piece of prime real estate like that shouldn't be left to chance. It's an asset, and assets need to be properly managed. Prime real estate, an asset, not a home, not a legacy, just a number on a balance sheet." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The final wall in my heart crumbled to dust. I looked at Lucas one last time, waiting, begging silently for him to prove me wrong, to say something, anything, to defend me, to defend his own childhood home. He cleared his throat. He picked up his glass of water. He took a slow sip. He did not flinch at his father-in-law's words. And in his silence, I heard his answer. I stood. I walked. I left. I understood then. I truly understood. They weren't just trying to move me out. They were trying to erase me. I didn't cry on the drive back. Tears felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. The pain from that meeting was different. It wasn't the hot, sharp pain of a slap. It was a cold, quiet dread that settled deep in my bones. Mr. Gable's words echoed in my mind. Prime real estate. An asset. It wasn't just about their concern. It was a business transaction. And I was the only thing standing in the way. But why the rush? Why the cruelty? A piece of the puzzle was still missing. I walked into the darkness of my gallery office. The silence, a welcome friend. My eyes scanned the room and landed on a plain cardboard box in the corner. Lucas had dropped it off a few weeks ago. Just some old files from college, Mom. And a package I had sent here. Can you hold on to it for me? An innocent request, a normal son-to-mother favor. But after that meeting, nothing felt normal anymore. Nothing felt innocent. I found a palette knife. I slit the packing tape. I opened the box. Inside, on top of a dusty textbook, was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't addressed to Lucas. It was addressed to their apartment. But it had my gallery's address written on it as a return label. He had used me as a mail drop. My hand didn't tremble as I pulled out the contents. It wasn't files. It was their life, spelled out in black and white. Credit card statements, stacks of them, American Express Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, the kind of cards you don't get with a modest income. I sat down at my husband's desk. I turned on the small lamp. I began to read. Greed is a map. I was finally seeing the destination. The numbers told a story of desperation disguised as luxury. $5,000 for a handbag I couldn't even pronounce the name of. $8,000 for a weekend wine tasting trip to Napa. $12,000 for a down payment on a sports car Lucas couldn't possibly afford. Page after page, it was a hemorrhage of money they didn't have. The minimum payments were highlighted in red. The interest rates were predatory. They weren't just in debt. They were drowning in it. This explained the greed, but it didn't explain the cold, calculated cruelty. It didn't explain the plan. My eyes fell on another item in the box, his old laptop, the one he asked me to store because Veronica's minimalist apartment had no room for clutter. Another favor, another piece of the board. I plugged it in. The machine whirred to life, its fan whispering in the quiet office. The login screen appeared. The password was the name of his childhood dog, a password I had given him. A wave of nausea washed over me. I opened his email, a draft, never sent, addressed to Mr. Gable. The subject line read, Update. The message was short. She's not budging. We may have to move forward with the competency evaluation sooner than planned. My blood ran cold, but the final blow wasn't in the email. It was in the web browser. The history was a timeline of his betrayal. Last month, luxury wedding venues. 2 weeks ago, how to apply for high-limit credit cards. Last week, signs of early onset dementia in seniors. And then the searches from last night, after he got home from our family meeting. I read the words out loud, my voice a dead whisper in the empty room. How to get power of attorney over an elderly parent. Legal steps for gaining guardianship. Declaring a parent mentally incompetent New York. How do you mourn someone who is still alive? It wasn't the debt that broke me. It wasn't the lies. It was the search history. The cold, methodical, step-by-step planning of my erasure, typed out by the same fingers I had once taught to hold a crayon. That's when I knew. I hadn't lost my son to a woman. I'd lost him to a plan, and he was never, ever coming back. The last tear I shed was for the boy who drew me a son. The woman I was now had no more tears to give. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the glow of the screen painting my face in cold blue light. The words blurred, but their meaning was seared into my mind. Guardianship. incompetent, power of attorney. These weren't just words, they were weapons, and they had been aimed directly at my heart. But a heart that has been shattered and then frozen over is no longer a vulnerable target. It becomes a shield. Their greatest mistake was never the greed, it was never the cruelty. Their greatest mistake was underestimating me. They saw a quiet, aging artist, a grieving widow. They saw a mother whose love they could twist and leverage like any other asset. They never saw the woman my husband married, the woman who sat beside him for 30 years, not just as his wife, but as his business partner. The woman who could read a balance sheet as easily as she could critique a brushstroke. Have you ever been so underestimated that it becomes your greatest weapon? They thought they were the predators. They thought I was the prey. They were about to learn that even the quietest creatures have the sharpest teeth. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed harshly against the oak desk, a violent interruption to the stillness. The screen lit up. Veronica. I let it ring. Once. Twice. A small, silent reclaiming of power. On the third ring, I answered, my voice deliberately soft, a little fragile. Hello? Evelyn. Her voice was sharp, impatient, stripped of all pretense. I'm glad I caught you. Lucas told me about your little walkout today. Very dramatic. I said nothing. Silence is a canvas. You let your opponent paint their own ugly picture on it. Look, she sighed. I don't have time for games. We're trying to help you. My father has already contacted a lawyer. We're filing the competency papers tomorrow morning. A threat, delivered as a favor. Classic Veronica. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement for the assisted living facility. If you cooperate, this can all be very smooth. If you don't... She let the threat hang in the air. My thumb moved across the screen of my phone. A small red circle appeared in the corner of the display. Record. She gave me a threat. I accepted it as evidence. I don't understand, I said, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. Papers? A lawyer? Veronica, what are you talking about? Her exasperated sigh was audible. She took the bait. For God's sake, Evelyn, are you really this dense? We are taking legal steps to have you declared mentally unfit to manage your own affairs. That means we will make the decisions about your health, your home, and your finances. Is that clear enough for you? If you fight us, we will have you removed from that apartment. Do you understand me now? Every word, a perfect self-incriminating gift. I took a slow breath. When I spoke again, the tremor was gone. My voice was calm, clear, and cold as ice. I'm sorry, Veronica. The connection must be poor. You said something about having me removed. The silence on the other end of the line was sudden and absolute. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the dawning horror that she had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. A click. She hung up. I didn't smile. I ended the call. I saved the recording. I opened my contacts. My finger scrolled past Lucas without a flicker of hesitation and stopped on a name I hadn't needed to call in years. Mr. Whitaker. He answered on the second ring, his voice as steady and reliable as I remembered. Evelyn? Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Arthur, I replied, my tone purely business. The wedding is still on for Saturday. A pause. I see. How can I help? I need you to be there. Bring the complete Whitaker Holdings portfolio, the trust documents, and the file on the apartment lease guarantee I co-signed for my son. He was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, what's happening? Nothing is happening, Arthur, I said, looking at the city lights twinkling outside my window. Everything is about to be made right. I hung up the phone. The trap was set. The evidence was secured. All they had to do now was show up to their own execution. I returned to the wedding reception. The music was playing again. The laughter was loud. Lucas and Veronica were on the dance floor, bathed in golden light, the perfect picture of a happy couple. They were celebrating their victory. My son glanced over, saw me, and quickly looked away. Veronica's eyes met mine for a brief second, a flicker of triumphant malice in them before she turned back to her adoring crowd. They thought my return was an act of surrender, an old woman coming back for scraps of affection. I just sat. I waited. I watched the clock. Right on time, the grand doors of the ballroom swung open. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. He was tall, silver-haired, with an air of quiet, unshakable authority. Arthur Whitaker. My late husband's oldest friend and my family's lawyer for 40 years. Lucas and Veronica stopped dancing. They looked at each other, a smug, knowing smile exchanged between them. They likely assumed I had called him in a pathetic attempt to negotiate, to beg. Mr. Whitaker ignored them. He walked directly to me. He gave a slight, respectful bow. Evelyn. Then he turned to face the room. The music slowly faded as the guests began to murmur, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Good evening, everyone. My apologies for the interruption. My name is Arthur Whitaker, and I am the legal and financial advisor for the Whitaker Trust, established by the late Robert Whitaker and managed by his widow, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes." He let the title hang in the air. Not Evelyn, not Mom. Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, a formal declaration of power. He walked calmly toward the stunned couple. "Lucas, Veronica," he began, his voice polite but firm. "I'm just here to clear up a few financial matters before you embark on your new life together." Truth has a simple, brutal sound. He placed his briefcase on a nearby table. He opened it with 2 sharp clicks. He produced a file. "First, the matter of your apartment lease, the one with the $7,000 monthly rent. I have here the guarantee agreement, co-signed by Mrs. Hayes, which, as of this moment, is officially revoked." A collective gasp went through the room. Veronica's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Whitaker didn't look at her. He continued addressing my son. "And the lease on your new sports car, Lucas. Also guaranteed by the trust, also revoked. And finally, these credit card statements." He fanned out the papers I had found, the evidence of their reckless spending. "All tied to accounts funded by your mother, all of which will be frozen by morning." Each statement was a hammer blow. The foundation of their perfect, curated life was cracking right before their eyes. Then came the moment Veronica sealed her own fate. She found her voice, a shrill, hysterical shriek. "He's lying! She's doing this to spite us. She's a confused, vindictive old woman. We were trying to get her help. She's mentally incompetent." The exact words. The very trap she had set for me. Mr. Whitaker waited patiently for her to finish. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "On the matter of Mrs. Hayes' competency..." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He pressed a button. Veronica's own voice filled the dead silent hall, tinny and horrifyingly clear from the small speaker. "We are taking legal steps to have you declared mentally unfit. If you fight us, we will have you removed from that apartment. Do you understand me now?" The recording played. It stopped. Silence. Veronica collapsed into a nearby chair, her face a mask of utter disbelief and ruin. Lucas just stood there, his body shaking, looking not at his wife but at me. For the first time all night, he was truly looking at me. And in his eyes, I saw the dawning horror of a man who finally understood the price of his betrayal. But Mr. Whitaker wasn't finished. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out one last item, the old leather-bound ledger. My husband's ledger, the foreshadow from Act 2. He placed it on the table with a soft, final thud. He opened it to the last page. He turned it so Lucas could see. "Your mother has maintained your father's meticulous records, Lucas," he said, his voice softer now, almost sad. The entry for this $53,000 wedding is on page 112, funded entirely by her. He paused, letting the weight of it all settle. Then he delivered the final blow. And as of my call with the probate judge this evening, I am legally bound to inform you that Mrs. Hayes has amended her will. You have been formally disinherited. He looked at my son, whose face had crumbled into absolute despair. Mr. Whitaker's voice was barely a whisper. She asked me to ask you one question, son. Was it worth it? I didn't look back. Not once. Behind me, in that gilded ballroom, a world was collapsing. I could feel it, more than I could hear it. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than any shouting could ever be. I walked out into the cool night air, the city lights stretching before me like a promise. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The stranger they had created at the start of the night had served her purpose. Now, it was time for Evelyn to come home. That was 2 years ago. The gallery is different now. The heavy silence I once found solace in has been replaced by something far better, the low hum of creation. The scent of oil paint and turpentine is now mixed with the bright chatter of young voices, the scratch of charcoal on paper, and the soft melodies playing from a corner speaker. It is no longer just my sanctuary. It has become a harbor for others. After the wedding, I liquidated a portion of my husband's more aggressive stocks. With the capital, I established the Evelyn Trust. It's not a charity, it's an investment in talent that might otherwise be silenced by the world's noise, by families who don't understand, by the simple, brutal economics of being an artist. We provide studio space, materials, and a small stipend to a handful of gifted young artists each year. We give them what I almost lost, the dignity of creating on their own terms. True wealth is the legacy you build for others. And what of Lucas and Veronica? I heard they divorced within a year, buried under a mountain of debt they had so eagerly built together. Veronica's parents, the Gables, faced their own financial ruin after several of their questionable real estate dealings came to light in the aftermath. Karma, I suppose, is the most meticulous accountant of all. Lucas called, once or twice in the beginning. His voice on the phone was a ghost from another life, full of things I no longer needed to hear. Justifications, rambling apologies, blame. He never once took full ownership of his choices. He only lamented his consequences. I listened for a moment. I wished him peace, and then I changed my number. I keep one small photograph of him as a boy, the one with the crayon smudge on his nose, tucked away in my husband's desk. Sometimes I look at it. I allow myself to miss the boy who drew me a son, but I no longer grieve the man who chose the shadows. You can love a memory, but you cannot live in it. Tonight, the gallery is hosting its annual showcase. The room is filled with patrons, critics, and the vibrant, nervous energy of artists debuting their work. I stand on a small stage, looking out at the faces of our first class of recipients. Among them is a young painter named Maya. Her talent is breathtaking, raw, and brilliant, but her family had told her to abandon her childish hobby and get a real job. I clear my throat. A great artist once said that the object of art is not to reproduce reality, but to create a reality of the same intensity. I look at Maya. Tonight, we are here to celebrate artists who do just that. But talent is not enough. It needs a key to a door, to a room of one's own, where that intensity can be nurtured. I step down from the stage. I walk to her. In my hand, I hold a single old-fashioned brass key. It's the key to the loft apartment above the gallery, my home, the prime real estate that started it all. I am moving to a smaller place by the sea next month, a place of my own choosing. I press the key into Maya's trembling hand. Her eyes fill with tears, but these are not tears of pain. They are tears of possibility. The Trust is proud to offer you this key to our first artist-in-residence apartment. I say, my voice clear and steady. Go. Create. Build your world. She looks from the key to my face, speechless. In her eyes, I see a forever sun. I have learned that the greatest revenge is not a storm of fury. It is the quiet, deliberate act of building something beautiful in the space where you were once broken. Dignity isn't inherited, it's built. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for holding space for my story today. We all have a family story of our own that deserves to be heard, and I would be honored to read yours in the comments. I hope you'll subscribe, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon.